MacAskill.
Pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I first of all pay tribute to the member for Strangford for securing this debate, and also I think for putting forward such an eloquent statement, including the passionate and compassionate testimony, because there is something about oral testimony, whether as an elected member or indeed as a minister, that if you see something actually and can hear it or feel it, then it's much more, no matter how good a briefing may come from an individual, a member of your staff, or indeed an able civil servant. So the comments regarding Peter Shannon and his family, I think, hit home. I think we're all aware, even before we became briefed on this issue or became elected members, that people with kidney and renal disease do suffer greatly. It is life-threatening, and clearly once you're on dialysis, that is a significant issue, because not only is it still life-threatening if you don't obtain the treatment, but it's life-changing. And it's not simply life-changing for the individual, often in terms of the loss of employment, the whole change of the circumstances of the life that they've led that can be deeply restricted, as indeed the member for Strangford commented on. It's also the fact that impact it has on other members of the family and the impact upon them, because it can require them to change their employment situation. It can impact upon other youngsters who don't get the same, perhaps, parental attention that would be available to others. And obviously, as I say, I think the member for Strangford eloquently put forward many points that I would support and sustain. I think it's largely a debate in which we are all on the same side, because nobody enters into party or politics, and certainly into Westminster, to seek to make their constituency worse off or indeed endanger the livelihood of their and lives of their members. There are some points I will make, though, at the end, I think, where there are some differences with regard to the government, but it has to be said that there are governments in other countries that don't seem to have the same political hue or perspective as mine, and indeed are probably closer to a right-of-centre position as put forward by the current government, yet who do carry out these policies, and I will be making that suggestion. I think there's two aspects that I want to touch upon. First of all, there's the difficulty for those requiring to obtain treatment for themselves or their children, and secondly, there's the difficulties, as the honourable member for Strangford correctly pointed out, the difficulties that exist for those who are undergoing home treatment with dialysis. I think, first of all, dealing with the travel, there's a particular constituency issue, and it's the same as it's recorded in the member for Strangford's mind. I had a constituent come in to see me, a Polish woman trying to sustain her life, her family. Her child requires to have dialysis treatment. Now, in Scotland, dialysis treatment for children, it's difficult enough for adults, but for children it can only take place at Glasgow or Aberdeen. She lived in East Lothian. It's a considerable distance to Glasgow to take that child. He cannot go on his own. He has to be taken by the mother or father, who have to take time off of their work. It impacts upon the wider family, and also it's the cost. And in that, it's not so much a matter for the Minister, it's a matter for the Scottish Health Secretary, and I've written to him and await a reply, because at the present moment there's a postcode lottery. Some health boards are particularly generous, some health boards seem to be entirely lacking. And certainly for my constituent trying to get from Musselburgh, it's financially draining, extremely difficult, traumatic for her, not just her son, but indeed for her family, and therefore I think matters up the road have to be addressed. But I have no doubt there will be similar issues that affect here, and they require to be considered, and no doubt it's a matter that the Minister will be considering. But then there's the question of the home treatment, because that's also been worsened both by COVID in terms of mental health, but also by the current fuel crisis, because that is causing real difficulties. We do have the euphemism at the present moment, that I find entirely spurious, about people self-disconnecting. There is no such thing as self-disconnecting. People are not simply saying, oh, well, I'm going to save for a holiday in Marbella, therefore I won't put my power on. They're having to choose, as is often said, between heating or eating. But for those on dialysis, it's far worse, because it's not simply about access to heating, which is necessary, and as the member for Strangford said, you feel the cold more when you're ill, you require it more, but it's the access to power, because it's the ability to have your mobile phone charged so that you can dial 999 if there is a significant problem. It's the ability to wash your clothes by putting the washing machine on if you have to go to the doctors or hospital and want to look smart and presentable because you wish to uphold decency and values. And it's also the requirement to keep the dialysis machine on when it's ticking and putting up the costs that are ratcheting up, and you simply cannot afford it. So that euphemism of self-disconnection is an entire fraud, and there are significant issues for those who are on, as I say, dialysis. There is the issue, and The member for Strangford pointed out that people in deprived areas tend to be higher and requiring to go for treatment than actually having dialysis treatment at home. There's a reason for that, and that is because most people on prepaid meters are not able to get access to dialysis machines. That is fundamentally wrong. Now, I can understand why there's restrictions imposed and why it is difficult, but it's fundamentally wrong. They should be able to access it, and the way to solve it is actually to ensure that those on prepaid meters, not just those who are most deprived, who have the least, but often those who are forced upon it because they're in a private residency and a private tenancy that insists upon it, would be to level the charges. At the present moment, those on a prepaid meter pay a higher standing charge, a higher tariff, and yet they have lower income. That is perverse. There is no technical impediment that requires a power company not to level the charges. It could be dealt with. It requires Ofgem to take the action, and it requires the government to impose it. So that's the point with regard to prepaid meters. But there are also the other aspects that other countries do, even of countries not of a left-of-centre position that I would subscribe to. Other countries do bring in both social tariffs and indeed disability tariffs, so that those who have least, those who are sick, can be charged at a lower rate. Belgium, for example, operates a circumstance where the third with least are actually charged at a lower rate. Other countries have circumstances where those who are in receipt of dialysis can get financial support, because the financial support provided at the present moment is haphazard, is certainly going nowhere near the requirements of meeting the cost of running and operating a dialysis machine. And on that basis, I think there has to be political change. That is something where the Minister has the powers. It's not a matter of blaming Ofgem, because Ofgem operate to a position of taking directions from base, and it's the decisions there that have to come. But on that note, because other than that, I think we are all agreed that we have to provide greater sympathy, we have to provide support for mental health, we have to provide a greater access for people to be able to get to treatment centres, but fundamentally, those being treated at home have to be able to pay for the treatment that they require to get.